I'm Bill Dwight of Exploded View. Well, the hot topic in sports these days is cooling fast now that the NFL referees were invited back to do their jobs. And I recommend Dave Zirin's thoughts on that dust-up in the nation, which you can find a link to somewhere on this site here. We'll show you. But there's an ongoing drama that's sports-related, or at least involves the self-identified sports industry. And it's playing out in the Senate race in Connecticut, where Democrat Chris Murphy is running against Republican candidate Linda McMahon to replace Joe Lieberman, of all people, who is retiring. McMahon's running much like Mitt Romney in that she touts her business experience as a very successful CEO, recently retired, of a major money-making corporation. She also represents herself as a moderate, pro-choice Republican in the New England Republican tradition of social moderate fiscal conservative. And she's a woman, which, given the chromosomal imbalance in D.C., is significant. Another important aspect in this race, or of this race, is that the outcome really could determine which party has the majority in the Senate. But Linda McMahon's strength is also shaping up to be her major weakness. Author and commentator Dave Zirin's column Edge of Sports appears on Sports Illustrated website, and he's the host of XM Satellite's weekly show Edge of Sports Radio. Zirin is also a regular contributor to The Nation, and he's a columnist for Slam Magazine and The Progressive, as well as being a frequent guest on ESPN's Outside the Lines and Democracy Now! So thanks for sparing us the time, Dave. I understand that apparently you're a very busy person.
Kind of busy, but never too busy to slam the McMahon family or World Wrestling Entertainment.
Well, we really do appreciate taking the time for that. So actually, along that line, can you talk a bit about candidate McMahon's business and explain why it might be an asset and a liability in this election?
Well, I assume it would be an asset because it's based in Connecticut, and World Wrestling Entertainment has gone from a small family-owned company by Vincent McMahon Sr. To a billion-dollar publicly traded corporation. Like I said, all headquartered in Connecticut, and I'm sure she's touting that very much, that that government regulation holds back her company, like I'm sure she would argue it holds back other small businesses, and if elected, she would make the country as well as the state of Connecticut more business friendly. It's kind of a bizarre argument. It's like what's good for World Wrestling Entertainment is what's good for America.
And her business being World Wrestling Entertainment, Inc., as you said, she's partnered with her husband, Vince McMahon, who's basically the face of World Wrestling Entertainment. And it should be noted that she is retired in order to run for office. But why don't you give us a thumbnail sketch of why this might become a liability for her? I mean, if she's a successful business owner, a moderate Republican, and a woman, one of the few running for office, I mean, she should be a lock, right?
Well, there's nothing moderate about how World Wrestling Entertainment made its money. World Wrestling Entertainment became a billion-dollar publicly traded corporation largely on the strength of the explosion of its brand in the 1990s, which is otherwise known as the Attitude Era in World Wrestling Entertainment. And if you go back to the 1990s, if you can find the clips of them, although the McMahon family is being very aggressive about scrubbing them off of the internet, they garnered an audience by dealing largely for entertainment purposes, of course, highly scripted, very athletic sports entertainment purposes of violence against women was a big part of what they did. Homophobia and gay bashing was a big part of what they did. Chanting homophobic slurs at wrestlers and celebrating those chants, a big part of what they did, including homophobic chants directed at Vincent Kennedy McMahon himself. I don't know what the guidelines are in terms of what I can say or what I can't say.
You are free to say whatever you want.
Okay, well, to celebrate and sell merchandise and to celebrate 30,000 people chanting at Vincent McMahon, "You love cock," that's how they made money, with a big picture of a rooster on a t-shirt that WWE sold. But even that pales in comparison, and even the horrific violence against women that they would celebrate on the show pales in comparison to just the deaths, the broken bodies, the destroyed lives of literally dozens of former WWE so-called superstars. I mean, you talk to a former WWE wrestler who's not on the payroll and happens to still be alive, the horror stories they have about coercion to use the most unregulated kinds of anabolic steroids I mean, if you had a death rate in the NFL like you've had in World Wrestling Entertainment, there would be 24/7 congressional hearings going on. People would go to prison. Linda McMahon would be running this campaign like Eugene Debs from behind bars. That's how ugly it is. Now, it has taken a turn in the last couple of years. The wrestlers are less steroidal, if that's a word. They're clearly less on the juice. There's a wellness policy. The violence against women has been tamped down. The homophobia has been tamped down. And yet cynics, as well as people who are inside the company, say the same thing, that this has been done to actually help Linda McMahon's political career, to pave the way for her to actually run a Senate run without having this hanging over her shoulders.
The death rate that you describe is actually horrific. It's men, principally men, I think, almost solely men, who have died before they're in their 30s,
Yes.
and including the Chris Benoit horror,
Yes.
who he committed suicide. He did a murder-suicide. He killed his family and then himself. Some attributed to roid rage, as it's known, euphemistically. But the larger thing is that, of course, the way the McMahon people are presenting this is that Linda McMahon was ran the day-to-day operations. Vince McMahon was the one who did the storylines. He's the one who promoted the aberrant behavior. And she was insulated from this, that she's actually not responsible for that. She did the nuts and bolts money stuff that made them very rich. Does that sell to you? Are you buying that?
Because it doesn't sell for two reasons. It doesn't sell for two big reasons. The first reason why it doesn't sell is that the McMahon family has always sold themselves as a family, as people who make these decisions collectively, not just Vincent and Linda, but also their children, Shane McMahon, Stephanie McMahon, and Stephanie McMahon's husband, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, real name Paul Levesque, who has been CEO, chairman of the board, in terms of creating what happens in WWE. So for Linda McMahon to say that she had nothing to do with the storylines is ridiculous. It's also ridiculous because she was often parts of those storylines. I mean, she allowed herself to be portrayed at different points as an abuser of children, somebody who would have herself slapped by her own children on television. She once portrayed herself as somebody who was in a catatonic coma while her husband had sex in front of her. I mean, we're not exactly talking family values here. And, you know, I'm no prude in any way, shape, or form, but I am a big believer in truth. So for her to sell herself as somebody who is distanced from the very spectacle that she actually put herself at the heart of in terms of several World Wrestling Entertainment storylines, I mean, she would have to also sell the idea that she is suffering from a multiple personality disorder.
We should make the distinction also, as you did make the distinction about the difference between the Attitude Era, so-called by them, which was that period of the late 1990s into the early 2000s, where very sexualized themes and prurient stuff was promoted because that's what made them rich. That's what really got them in the bump. It's interesting, as you also note, that the WWE, not directly the campaign, has worked very hard to clean up the internet of all vestiges of that particular era. What you can find is stuff that's going on today. And to blow our own horn a little bit, here at Exploded View, we're featuring cuts from film produced by the Media Education Foundation called Wrestling with Manhood, which started in 2003. The film was made in 2003, which actually does have the clips, and they are protected. The McMahon family cannot have those expunged from the internet because this is part of a critical film talking about the very issues that you're describing. And a particularly egregious one, it features Vince McMahon basically making Trish Stratus crawl around on all fours and bark like a dog, and then strip down for the public, while the stands filled principally with men or boys cheer this on, and it really is a grotesque display. And I would imagine, you know, in any candidate that had this in their closet, I would imagine would represent something a little more than awkward.
Yeah, to put it mildly. I mean, this should be a disqualifier for her running for the Senate. I mean, it's not dissimilar to Larry Flint running for office and saying, hey, do you remember that picture of the woman in the meat grinder? Well, you know, that's the past, and I had nothing to do with that. I mean, that really would be the equivalent of this, because putting women in meat grinders and specifically rape culture, violence against women, was the Attitude Era's stock in trade. The Trish Stratus clip that you mentioned is actually a tame example of what they did. I think it's gotten a lot more publicity because it was Vince McMahon directly involved in it. But the kind of stuff they did that focused around kidnapping, around rape, around roofies, all things like that, all for the enjoyment, not to be critical of these things, but all for the enjoyment of a primarily male and, as you correctly mentioned, very young male, even juvenile audience, should in all theory be a disqualifier, but it's not. And one of the reasons why it's not is that Linda McMahon is resting on the whole reality-unreality aspect of World Wrestling Entertainment. Not that dissimilar from what Arnold Schwarzenegger did when he ran for governor of California and was asked about, gee, you have all these violence in your movies and all these horrible things happened in your movies. And his response was always, well, it was a movie. It's Hollywood. It's how I made my business. That should not be a disqualifier. But I would argue very strongly that World Wrestling Entertainment is very different. The McMahons were playing themselves. They were representing themselves. And if Arnold Schwarzenegger had ever done a documentary where he shot and killed a woman, and even if it was for play, like a mockumentary, and said, I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger and this is how I divorce my women, that would be seen, I would think, as a disqualifier for him to run for public office. And that's exactly why I don't think the McMahons, Linda McMahon in particular, should be able to hide behind the whole reality-unreality aspect of World Wrestling Entertainment.
Well, it's kind of astonishing. I mean, it certainly comes up, and it came up when she was running in the primaries. But the fact is that it hasn't really had the purchase that I would imagine her opponents would hope that it would have. But it's particularly ironic because she is running as she is a woman, and that's one of the things that she advances. Yet at the same time, this exploitive pap that she generated, that she was responsible for, is virulently anti-woman and anti-male and anti-LGBT. I mean, it's everyone's pretty much covered, even racial minorities as well.
I mean, if there's anything that I think women ruling class politicians have proven in the United States is that gender is not necessarily destiny. And oftentimes it provides quite the leg up for you if you are a Michelle Bachmann or a Sarah Palin and you're a virulent opponent of women's reproductive rights, for example, women's health. You're willing to man the barricades against, pardon the expression, man the barricades against Planned Parenthood. Like, gender is not destiny. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that gender does not mean women's equality in terms of political representation in the United States. And of course, some women, of course, in Congress are champions of women's rights and women's liberation. But it's like we got to look at the politics, not just the gender. And in terms of Linda McMahon, I mean, we see someone who made her fortune through exploiting violence against women.
Check out Dave Zirin's edgeofsports.com, and you'll find links to his books and other links to his sites on exploded-view.org. I should get our own URL correctly. Thank you very much, Dave. I really appreciate your time before your shower, and I'd love to talk to you again some more.
Hope so, Bill. Thank you.